Now let's have a look at why it's so important to use relative measures such as rems rather than absolute measures such as pixels in development. Let's look at a couple of examples. We'll look at 4 websites, and let's start by looking at what they look like with the default settings on the font size. Udemy Online Learning, Starbucks, Emirates, and Tesla. Already here on Tesla, we can note that there are accessibility issues. What with an auto-playing video we can't stop and text placed on top of the video. To test for Zoom support, we open the settings in Chrome. We then select appearance, then customized font size, and finally we set the font size to 32 pixels. Here. The reason why we do that is that 1 rem equals 16 pixels. If we set the default font size to 32 pixels, everything formatted as 1 rem will now be displayed in a size of 2 rems, meaning that everything which has been formatted using rems will appear with a 200% zoom, which is something we must support. So let's see what happens to our website. We'll start with Udemy and how it should be. So the learning platform Udemy does an excellent job on this, proof that this is possible. Even without inspecting, it's clear that Udemy fully supports text zoom. When scrolling, you can see the difference between the text and the logos, which are images, so won't resize when we apply zoom on text only. It's clear that the Udemy folks did a brilliant job in using relative measurements everywhere. Everything resizes and reflows properly. Now let's have a look at Starbucks. Starbucks looks nice on a superficial glance, but that's because the default font size is large. To see how the text has been formatted, we have to inspect it, which is what we do in the browser. And we have to look at styles, by the way. We can't just inspect the font because that is not reliable. To see whether rems or pixels have been used, we have to look at the styles. So by inspecting the heading, here, we can see that the font size is set to 24 pixels. And by inspecting the text, we can see that the font size is set to 19 pixels, which means that these elements won't receive zoom on text only. It's clear from the inconsistency that the label on the button has resized. So let's inspect that. And here we need to scroll down a little bit to get the font size. And we can see that it's variable, and if we hover it, we can see that it's set to 1.6 rem, which is the correct way of doing it. But now the page looks really inconsistent with this mixture of use of pixels and rems. So let's move on to Emirates. And this is interesting because in our last training, we saw how they had done a really good job on alt text. But let's see how they do on relative measures. On a first glance, it looks like text is resizing correctly. But this is a great example of how working on text size is not enough. We also have to use relative measures in interlines and content box sizes, for example. On the top, it's supposed to read stretch out in premium economy, but the text when resizing overlaps. So let's inspect this. The problem here is caused, as you can see down here, by the use of negative margins, which is always a risky choice, as our absolute positioning. So speaking of absolute positioning, here something else goes wrong, right? We have an overlap on this link. So when we inspect it, we can see that that is exactly what they did. They added a position absolute to this element, which means that it doesn't reflow properly when the text receives zoom. So finally, towards the end of the page, things until here resizes correctly, but towards the end of the page, we have a really good example of why positioning text on top of images is such a bad idea, because this may look fine in its default size, but it's very unpredictable what will happen when the text receives zoom. And finally, let's look at the Tesla website. There are a number of accessibility issues here, from the video playing automatically without possibility of stopping it, and the text being placed on videos and images without consideration of color contrast. But let's look at the text zoom. At a first glance, it doesn't look like anything has resized from what we saw in the original version, so let's inspect. So inspecting this H1, we can see that what they have done is they are using absolute measures on the text, and they have set it to be of 40 pixels on desktop and 36 pixels on mobile. And the price here, the call out, again, they're using absolute measures, 20 pixels on desktop and 18 pixels on mobile. Scrolling the rest of the page, it's clear that Tesla doesn't really prioritize accessibility just by a superficial glance.